This presentation is being recorded, as was mentioned, so also don't worry about if you missed something from a slide. And we're going to go ahead and get kicked off with Turbocharge Your Grant Strategy, 3 ways to level up your prospecting. So if you haven't already in the Zoom chat, it would be great for you to share your name, your organization, what you do for your nonprofit, as well as your nonprofit's mission or latest initiative, and your biggest challenge related to prospecting. And I believe we have a Zoom poll as well. So if you want to throw up that Zoom poll, we can start to see and gauge where people are coming in at in terms of the room. So the question for today is, what is your biggest challenge related to prospecting? Is it struggling to find good fit funders, not having enough time to research, not knowing what to do once I found them, or feeling overwhelmed by simply all the things you have to do? So why don't you go ahead and input your response to that poll, and then we'll share that in a minute or so. And if you're still welcoming yourself into the room, it'd be great for you to answer some of the questions on the screen as well. So I'm seeing Ginger is coming in from the South Boston Neighborhood Development Corporation. Angela, it looks to be a consultant of sorts, as well as Jean. And Julie, they are a support organization for artists, arts and culture, and history organizations. They need to diversify their funding streams and reframe the narrative around their work. Awesome. Well, in case you haven't shared and you just joined the room, it would be great for you to also introduce yourself, since this is going to be a pretty interactive workshop. The first half of this is going to be teaching you some of the strategies, and the second half is going to be applying those strategies, and then we'll be underway. So let's go ahead and share those results. And what you can see is that it looks like we actually have a pretty even split across the board for 3 of the types, which is struggling to find good fit funders, being 35% of the representation, 26% coming to not having enough time to research. That's definitely a challenge point that I often hear. And then lastly, feeling overwhelmed by all the things that you have to do. Well, that's definitely something that we can help you tackle today in today's workshop with some of the strategies that we are going to be sharing. So let's go ahead and keep on moving along in today's presentation. As was mentioned, my name is Will, and I host bi-weekly workshops around grant writing and grant strategies through my company Instrumentl, where we feature best-selling authors as well as expert educators in the grant writing field. We essentially are the institutional fundraising platform, and we help nonprofits in finding, tracking, and managing their grants. So every single day we hear about these sorts of challenges that you guys are facing, as you just answered in the Zoom chat. And so ultimately this may resonate with you, in which maybe you are just getting started with funding a new program and you're not familiar with the funders in this subject area. Or maybe you're in a new region and you have no idea exactly where to start when it comes to looking for funders. Finding good fit funders was about 35% of the respondents for today. Or maybe you have that last option choice where you feel you don't have enough time to dedicate to your organization's prospecting needs. And then another common response was feeling overwhelmed by the sheer number of things you have to do when it comes to grant seeking. And then the last thing that often comes up is that you've generated a huge list of funding opportunities and prospects, and you don't know what to do next. And so if you have felt this way, it'd be great to see in the Zoom chat some sort of emoticon that helps kind of empathize with how you feel around some of these challenges. And then we can go ahead and start talking about how you might think to yourself, are grants worth all the effort? And the answer to this question is yes. In fact, there are 87,000 plus grant making foundations, 11,000 plus active grants on Instrumentl alone, and we add about 100 a week. And so in today's agenda, where we're going to start out is we're going to start kicking things off by talking about what is prospect research. We're going to cover the what, the why, and the how, and then we're going to dig into prospecting strategies. So these are the 3 ways that we're going to dig into this topic. We're going to talk about 4 must-dos. We're going to talk about 4 time savers, and then we're going to talk about 2 advanced tips that you can take. And then lastly, in the second portion of today's presentation, we're going to start finding good fit funders with Instrumentl. So every single person today is going to leave with some resources as well as a list of good fit funders for their nonprofit. So if you're excited with this, what we can talk about is you can stick until the end for this special 40-page resource that will help you in your grant prospect research in the case where the content that we teach you today is a little fast for you and you just need a little bit more time to digest everything that we go into. So now that we know where we're going, let's talk about first what prospect research is, the why, and the how behind it as well. The first thing we're going to talk about is what is prospect research. So when we're talking about prospect research, what we are discussing is finding, assessing, and qualifying funding opportunities strategically. It's using public information, data, and insights to help you prioritize which funders to approach. So on the right-hand side of your screen here, you see a standard grant life cycle. It's where you're going to be generating your idea, finding your funding, then developing your proposal, submitting it, and then managing your award. So what we're talking about in the context of prospect research is that bottom right corner of find your funder. Now, the reason why prospect research is so important is because by prospect researching, we tackle two big challenges that you guys are often facing. The first one is that we're breaking the habit of going after opportunities without some kind of strategy. In other words, some folks will approach grant writing from the standpoint of, oh, there's this opportunity, we can just apply for it, but it's actually a bad fit funder. But they don't know exactly how to evaluate whether or not it's a bad fit funder because they haven't conducted their prospect research. On another side of things, you might have the case where you are actually saving time by prioritizing your funding opportunities to maximize your time, which leads you to more successful grant applications. It's no different than when we're growing up and you first learn to, do your research for a report. The difference between just kind of spitballing what you find versus actually going on Google or going to your library and referencing a few different places to see exactly what is the best fit for you. And this is why prospect research is so important, because if you don't prospect research, then you're essentially not setting up yourself for success, especially when we look back to that grant funding cycle and you are not taking care of this early step. So finding your funding and finding the right funding can be so important in terms of identifying good fit funders. So how exactly do we prospect research? Well, we will typically prospect research by utilizing publicly available information on a few of the key things on the screen here, such as funder interests and priority areas. For example, if this funder is working on supporting some community services projects and you are a food shelter, then you might have alignment there. And another example is finding overall grant eligibility requirements and the application process. We're going to talk about different strategies that you can take when it comes to reviewing these eligibility requirements to see whether or not they are opportunities you should pursue. And then we're going to talk about things like funder assets and giving. The reason why that is important is because when you take a step back and you look at the 3 to 5 year trend of exactly what they have been giving to in the median amounts, you can see whether or not the grant program is in a healthy place for new grantees. And then you'll also find information like the names of key individuals, as well as a list of past grantees. The reason why the former is important is because that's going to give you a breakdown of whether or not you have an existing relationship to that foundation that you can use to start facilitating a new application to that foundation. And in the latter case, that's important because if you can see from your list of past grantees that there's a proven history of giving towards similar causes to yours, then you have a situation in which you are likely also a good fit funder in that sort of being a recipient from that foundation. So now we've gone over the what, the why, and the how that we do prospect research. Let's start digging into the 3 ways that we can really level up our prospecting with some strategies. So there are 3 sections around this that I'm going to dig into today. The first one are some must-dos. The second part are the time savers. And the last part are the next level strategies that will help you build on top of the list that we tackle in the first 2 sections. So let's go ahead and dig into the must-dos. When it comes to the must-dos, this might be a case where, and if you're in the audience and you're in this situation, I'd love to hear from you guys. You might be just starting out with your prospecting. You're asking yourself, where do I begin? In other words, maybe your executive director has given you the directive that you would like to start pursuing grants in 2022. It's a fresh year, and it's time for us to really start diversifying our revenue streams, like one of the folks in the chat shared. And so you might have this situation where you have no idea where to begin, and there's really 4 introductory prospecting tips that I can share with you. I'll dig into each one more deeply, but essentially the first one is going to be brainstorming terms or keywords to look out for. The second thing is breaking down your search into more specific individual searches. And the third one is running some immediate gut checks. And the last one is creating a grants calendar. And it looks like Emily's mentioned in the comments, we're reworking our theory of change and mission in order to even effectively prospect. Fair. So there are many steps that even an organization can take to getting grant ready. That's a whole different workshop that you can definitely check out in terms of our events calendar and things like that. But there are all sorts of steps that we can take before we get into the grant side of things, and that you might not even be in the case of when you are preparing for your prospecting. But let's first dig into how we might brainstorm key terms to search for and look out for when reviewing funder priorities and interest areas. So here's an example. What I have in this example here is I actually tutor for a after-school tutoring program every single week, and we work with high school students to have a one-to-one mentoring relationship. And what you might find are on the left-hand side, some more conventional ways that I would be thinking about prospect research, where I might think about things from the standpoint of looking for after school, looking for tutoring and mentoring, as well as high school, since those are some of the impacted areas of my community. But on the right-hand side, you're going to start to see some other keyword phrases that are also interesting. So if I were thinking outside the box, I would start thinking about things like educational access and equity, or I might look for things like college and career preparation, youth development and leadership. You might also see something in terms of community services or minority services and things like that, depending on which groups that you actually impact. And so when you are starting your prospect research, I think a lot of people kind of default to the level 1 thinking of how they can search for particular keyword terms, when really what's important for them to maximize their opportunities is to think about the level 2 thinking. It's the difference between, thinking about just the after school versus thinking about the educational access and equity. And so the key takeaway here is don't be afraid to think outside the box of just what your program's about. Think about things like, what are the outcomes in terms of the pervasive impact on your community? Think about things like, what are the objectives that you're stating in terms of your programs, as well as what actually are the different components of your program. So for example, thinking outside of the box, another example here, I can have my after school program for high school students, but what I might also realize is that one of our programs is around literacy. And so I might not think of that on level 1, but actually after thinking about how I can segment my searches, I might come up with something around literacy. I might come up with something around those sorts of, specific programs around tutoring and mentoring in particular income areas of XYZ community. So think about brainstorming different ways you can expand out your search from just the level 1 sort of searches that people have. The other way you can do this, depending on what tool you use, is expand out all of the different things that people are doing in terms of your databases, and then scroll through and select everything from the start to the bottom of the list that might be applicable. And then another pro tip for you is, if you've ever used a word cloud generator, what you can do is you can pull in the entire RFP of the last 3 to 5 grant proposals that you have applied for and run that through a word cloud generator. What that is going to tell you are the most commonly used phrases or words that the funders that you have thought are good fits have been using. And that might give you another short list of key terms to look out for when you are searching for funder priorities and interest areas. So that's our first tip when it comes to must-dos. The next tip is to really break down your search into different buckets. So if we go back to our example of a tutoring program for high school students, we might have funders for after-school programs, education access for underserved communities, but we might also have secondary searches, right? So we talked about the literacy program, but on another side of the program, we might also have things around STEM education. We might have things around vocational or trade education, students with disabilities, technology access. These are the sorts of things where what you want to think about is, from the last 100 or 1,000 people that your organization has served, what are the different demographics in terms of personas that often are served by your organization? So by bucketing it, not only from the first and secondary levels, you can also bucket it by the impacted service areas of what your programs are and or the people that you're serving. So that's another way that you can think about your searches. The third tip in terms of must-dos is you can think about what are some immediate gut checks you can introduce to your process. So if you don't think a funder is aligned at a glance, you are probably correct. Believe it or not, there's a ton of organizations that are still applying for grants that simply are not good fit funders for them. And the reason why is because they're trying to force a fit. And so the question to ask yourself is Can you pinpoint at least one sentence on the funder's website that describes your proposed work? Here's an example from the MSF Educational Support for Children grant. In this situation, the foundation is considering programs that provide one or more elements such as tutoring, mentoring, community engagement, leadership development, or enrichment, and are able to demonstrate an impact on learning. So what I've bolded on my screen here are some of the keyword terms from the first tip, as well as the second tip, that relate to what this funder cares about. In this situation, there is connection to tutoring and mentoring. There's a connection to leadership development of high school students, and there's a clear impact on learning. And so in this situation, there is clear alignment. But in this case, if this funder were saying something completely different and it had no connection to what we did in the first two steps, then it probably wouldn't be a good fit funder. And the reason why this is so important to hammer home is because funders are often also using this gut check when they read your application. I've had a lot of conversations with program officers, both at the community foundation and broader foundation level, and this is something that they are constantly looking for in their evaluation criteria. The fourth thing that you can do in terms of your must-dos is to create a grants calendar and plan ahead. The best way to win more grants in 2022 is to set up yourself for success with a systematic approach. Too often, people don't really think about the systems that will get them to more grants output. Instead, they're just focusing on their fundraising goal, where they have a fundraising goal of, for example, raising $200K from grants, but they have no way of breaking down exactly how that $200K is going to be achieved. And so it's never too early to create a grants calendar. What you can see on your screen here is an example of how you might create your grants calendar in a tool like Instrumentl, where you're going to have a breakdown of all the grants that you're working on in the next few months, as well as the deadlines coming up and the status for that respective thing. You might be doing that in an Excel tracker right now. That's perfectly manageable as a starting point, but eventually you might want to introduce more functionality that helps you really tackle these sorts of administrative tasks on a weekly basis. So what you're going to want to do when you're creating a grants calendar is you're going to want to think about how can you balance a list of both discrete deadlines as well as a list of no deadlines, right? And so in this situation, what you have is you're going to have rolling deadlines in which what you want to do is you're going to want to plan ahead in terms of the different deadlines that you already know your organization is going to have to work on. And then on the flip side of things, you're going to want to leave some spaces in your grants calendar that allow you to fill in opportunistic grants that may come up. So on the right-hand side here, what you can see is that when you're using a tool like Instrumentl, we're going to predict deadlines for you. That way you can forward anticipate and start planning ahead. And then on the second point of things, you're going to block out time so that you can get those LOIs out in terms of adding new opportunistic things to your grants calendar. So in this case, the key takeaway is time management and prioritization is key. So at this point, what we've talked about are some of the must-dos, which is really taking that first level of prospect research down to a secondary level where we're thinking outside the box. We're looking at the gut check to make sure that there is clear alignment in terms of the funders. And then lastly, we're creating a basic grants calendar for the next 6 to 12 months. Now let's dig into the second way that we can really turbocharge our grant strategy, which are the time savers. So the time savers are the point in which maybe you're at the point where you've already created a prospect list, but now you have to start utilizing this prospect list to actually understand what you want to prioritize. So in this situation, here are 4 indicators of a good fit funder. First, do we have any connections? Second, do their past giving and grantees align with my organization? Third, how often are they giving to new grantees? And fourth, do they have the resources and time to actually work on applying for this funder? So let's dig into each of these good indicators of good fit funders. So the first thing we can do is ask ourselves, do we have any connections to this funder? The way you can do this is you can take a note at their staff list, usually on their website, and you can review to see whether or not there is somebody that you might have an existing relationship with. You can ask your board, you can ask your staff, you can ask your volunteers, and essentially see whether or not there is an existing relationship where you can facilitate a warm introduction to that member of the board. The reason why that's helpful is because in many situations, the people that are coming up on this list are going to have overlap with other foundations and interest areas to you guys. And so this can often be a low-hanging fruit method of identifying a way in to the next funding cycle of grants. So the reason why I bring this up is because I run that bi-weekly grant workshop series. And in one of the workshops, one of our attendees shared how for the last 5 years or so, she has volunteered for a local community foundation, and she has a very strong relationship with the executive director at that foundation. And it came to her attention as she was working on her new nonprofit that by looking up the 990 report, that they actually had a grant making function that she was completely unaware of. And so all it took was for her to send a quick email to that executive director that she had an existing relationship with to essentially schedule a meeting, share about some of the work that she was working on, and get shortlisted on the next funding cycle. And then she was able to get funded in that next funding cycle from that foundation. So oftentimes, the first thing you can do when it comes to saving some time is just seeing, do you have an existing connection to the funder? Another helpful way to do this is go on LinkedIn and search by secondary and third connections and see whether or not you can identify somebody in your network that already has some sort of existing tie to the person that you're trying to reach out to. The next thing you can do is ask yourself, does a funder's past giving and grantees align with your organization? So geographically, can you identify historical grantees in your state or county? So here's a map of how that might look in Instrumentl. And what I'm showing you here is that 146 grantees are coming in from the state of California for this particular funder. And similarly, when you are going through 990 reports, what I want you guys to ask yourself is, can I see that there is a focus around my area for similar causes to mine? So here's an example. I'm digging in and I can see that in the case of California, if I'm talking about my example of the high school tutoring mentoring program, I see this grant that went out to the Alliance for College Ready Public Schools. And in this case, I can see that they are based out of LA, California. And over the last 3 years, I can also see that this funder has given to these particular areas of focus where education and youth development are two of the highest funded areas from this funder. So what this starts to signal to me is, A, there is past giving in my region, but B, there is also a key focus area around the impact area that I serve, which is education and youth development. And you start to see that when you start to look at the grant sizes as well. And that's the third part of this second tip, which is, are there past grants that are reflective of the size grant and the size type that you are actually interested in? So here you can see we have the Baton Rouge Youth Coalition, Inc. that received a grant in 2018 for $10K for general operating. We have the USC University Relations Department for $15K, providing tutoring stipends for the K2C After School and Saturday Academy program. And we have the Simmons College getting $200K for general and unrestricted. So if I were my example of an after school tutoring program for high school students, when I start to see that there is a past giving history around education, there's a past giving history around youth development, there's a past giving history around generous grants in terms of general operating expenses, I start to think to myself, ding, 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 I've got a good fit funder. And so these are the sorts of questions that you want to sort of ask yourself as you're working through these sorts of data points is, are these things clear, or am I kind of stretching things in order to find the fit from the funder? The third thing you can do in terms of time-saving strategies is look at how open they are to new grantees. So what percentage of their past grants are going to new grantees versus repeat grantees? The typical range is going to be 30 to 50%. So anytime you see something above that, it's even better. And what we tell folks is, if you start to look at this data in Instrumentl and you see that only 10% of new grantees are actually getting grants, well, you might want to deprioritize that funder from the other 4 or 5 opportunities that you have. And the reason why is because you simply have a better use of your time elsewhere in terms of active opportunities. You're not going to get this data statistic from other tools, but we're going to show you later on in today's workshop how you can see this in Instrumentl to kind of see a feel for yourself of how you can evaluate this question. And the reason why you want to also ask this question is because it'll help you answer questions like, what is the median grant amount for new grantees versus repeat grantees? Why is this important? Well, it can start to help you form that 6 to 12 month grants calendar. In the case where you know that in year 1, you can only expect 10 grand on average from this foundation, you know that in year 2, you can probably bank on there being an ask for 15 grand just based off historical giving patterns. This is also important in the case where you're sustaining relationships. If, for example, you realize that the funder that you've been receiving money from for the last 3 to 5 years actually has been giving 2 or 3 times the amount you've been asking for to all repeat grantees, then you have been leaving money on the table. So being able to ask yourself these sorts of questions are the keys to saving yourself time in achieving your fundraising goals, as well as aligning yourself to what your broader grant strategy is. That leads us to the 4th time saver tip, which is, do you have the time and resources to work with this funder? So something you want to ask yourself is, take a look at how lengthy the grant application process is and ask yourself whether or not you actually have the bandwidth to complete this application. I'll give you a tip. Generally speaking, a good rule of thumb is the lengthier the grant application process is, the lengthier the reporting is as well. And so if it looks daunting from the get-go and you're tight on time or you don't have the bandwidth to support that, you might want to deprioritize that opportunity. So you're going to want to prioritize the opportunities where you can easily reuse content from past applications to help you save time. What's good to do is to create some sort of working document within your organization that goes over some key sections that a ton of different grants have, whether that's your mission statement, your vision statement, your programs, your initiatives, whatever it is that you're working on that you find yourself having to type more than 2 or 3 times is probably something that can be documented and then shared across your team for iteration as well as improvement. The other things that you'll want to ask yourself is you want to make sure that you're actually willing to fulfill the reporting requirements after the award. Is the grant amount actually going to be worth it over time? The reason why I tell folks this is because sometimes they end up spending an entire week on a $1 grand grant opportunity when it's pretty much not a good use of their time, because they've spent more of their time in just the actual time to submit that, and then later on in the reporting in the actual amount they're receiving. And so these are the sorts of questions where you're going to want to read through what are some of these reporting requirements, as you can see on the screen here from the RWJF, of exactly what is going to be expected of you later on as you are getting rewarded the grants. If you need a guide to help you prioritize prospects, as a bonus for attending, you're gonna get a freebie for responding to the workshop feedback form at the end of this. So like I said earlier, that's that 40-page resource in the case where you wanna dig into more of these sorts of questions. We dig into things like, what are the 16 key questions to ask yourself to evaluate a good fit funder? You can print out this guide and then kind of go through it check by check. That way, in the case where you don't already have a go or no-go or a decision-making matrix tool, you'll have this when you are downloading that resource. So now we've gone over the must-dos, we've gone over the time savers. We're going to start digging into taking things to the next level as well and talking about how we can go beyond finding prospects with open opportunities. Naturally, what this leads to is the common question of, what do I do about invite-only funders or funders that don't have websites? Well, there's really 2 fundraising strategies. I skipped over the step of having a list of prospects. I actually haven't. So that's something in which we're going to be creating that list in the second portion of today's workshop in terms of creating that list of prospects. And the second thing that we're going to do here is we're going to just go ahead and dig into the 2 fundraising strategies outside of open grant opportunities. So the first thing we're going to do is look at seeing who has been funding similar organizations in your community. And the second thing is tapping into funders that align with you, but do not have open opportunities or websites. And so let's talk about how we can look into the first. In the first case, what we can do is look to see who is funding similar organizations in your community. What you can do is you can conduct a landscape analysis to look at other organizations similar to what you're doing. And you can do this either via Google search or by looking through a grantee list of your funders. The most conventional way that this is done by most grant writers who've been in the field for years is they open up the PDF version of the 990 reports and they scroll through those forms. I'm going to show you a faster way to do that later today, in which you can cut it based off of just the EIN number of that funder and just start searching through there. But what you can do is you can start to look at who funds them. This is not typically reported on 990 reports, so you do need to use tooling, but I will show you that when we set up Instrumentl in the second portion of today's workshop. workshop. And that's also when we're going to find that list of prospects as well. And then the second thing that you can do is you can develop a strategy to type into funders that do not have open opportunities. So these are those invite-only funders. In this situation, in order to evaluate an invite-only funder, you're going to use some of the same strategies that we talked about earlier in terms of the must-dos and the time savers. We're going to ask ourselves some key questions about qualifying funders with open opportunities. We're going to ask ourselves things like reviewing their openness to new grantees. What is the median grant amount, funder interest areas, as well as types of grants? And then we're going to fully understand the funder before we start approaching them. The reason why this is so important is because these are typically invite-only funders. So they are not just looking for you to be knocking at their door to introduce yourself in those situations. You want to show that you've actually done the research beforehand so that you can really start to build a meaningful relationship. And that's really the point where connections and relationships with these funders are key and will help you prioritize the most approachable prospects. You might be surprised at the connections that you didn't know that you had. Like I shared earlier, by simply creating a short list of foundations that you want to start building relationships with, you can run it through a LinkedIn or another professional network and essentially look at your secondary and third contacts to see whether or not there is a list of people that you can start working on building relationships with. And this is where you're going to want to ask your current donors for introductions. If you have strong relationships with them, you can tap into your board's existing relationships. In many situations, your board members are sitting on multiple boards of different organizations, and you can see whether or not you're connected to any of their past grantees as well. That is an underutilized tactic that I'll give you an exact email template that you can use in the next slide in terms of how you can reach out to those grantees. So if you have any connections with their grantees, you might be able to gain some deeper insights into their fundraising process. Don't be afraid to ask. Here's an example of how I might write that email to a past grantee. Dear XYZ, I came across foundation name and think they could be a great fit for our mission and program areas, given that they've historically been interested in supporting area. I noticed your organization was funded by them recently. Would you be open to sharing any advice or insights into their funding process? Here's why this is important, because most people aren't doing it. This is a very low lift strategy that you can do when you are looking through past grantees in order to get a better sense of whether or not this funder is worth it in terms of building a longer term relationship with them. In the case where the grantee comes back to you and they tell you, actually, they're one of our most stressful, funders because they have so many reporting requirements, things like that, then you just avoided yourself a whirlwind of headaches, right? And so ultimately, by asking these sorts of questions from past grantees, it can be an easy way for you to get the short end of the information you need to evaluate whether or not they are a good fit funder. This leads us to the point of a good reputation is priceless. Ultimately, when you are approaching invitation-only funders, I like to think of this Warren Buffett quote, which is, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. So if you think about that, you'll do things differently. What some people will do when it comes to invite-only funders is they will not respect the boundaries of what these funders have already stated in terms of their websites. So make sure that you're ready to, make sure you're also ready to actually expand your visibility in your community. And you can do this in non-intrusive ways as well in terms of publicizing your good work, telling some of the stories and case studies that are relevant, and just tightening up your website and social media. When I was interviewing some of these program officers at different foundations, one of the best things that a few of the program officers shared is, if a nonprofit wanted to just get on the radar of the foundation, they might do something where they would just ask whether or not the foundation would be open to getting added to their newsletter. And from there, they would start to get updates about that. And then once a year, even if they weren't yet eligible for their program, they would just meet for coffee in the local area. This is obviously pre-COVID, so make sure that you are practicing proper protocols today. But essentially, that was a good way that they were starting relationships with people that they then would fund in future cycles. So look for foundation program officers or content experts. Those are typically the most common titles of the people that are going to be of interest of you, especially when it comes from an invite-only standpoint. If you decide to reach out to a funder, like I said in the last section, be respectful of their boundaries and come from a place of genuine learning or partnership. You're going to want to acknowledge their giving interest and alignment because you want to show them that you did your research. When you reach out to them, you're going to want to actually note that you've done your research and find some sort of tactical way in order for you to share that with them. So you can invite them to your event. Ask questions, share a success story, position yourself as a resource and not somebody that is just asking for money. This is really important. This is your time to actually build a relationship, and your initial approach should not be to just ask for funding. If you're doing this, then you are essentially ruining your reputation before it's even begun. So that is something that we cannot emphasize enough in terms of respecting the boundaries of these invite-only funders and still finding a way to build a meaningful relationship in the long term. If you're looking for more tips and tricks, more templates, specifically more detailed email templates than what I shared today, you can check out our blog, which has more insights in terms of a complete guide of how to approach invite-only funders and get noticed in 2022. That leads us to the second portion of today's workshop, is the more interactive portion, which Rebecca talked about in terms of having a list of prospects, which is how to find good fit funders. So let's have everyone experience how easy it can be. Well, first, where do we find all this information? Well, the easiest way to do that is with Instrumentl. However, there are alternatives. You can check out things like Google, funder websites, 990 forms through GuideStar, the IRS website, and there might be other paid databases as well. But there's 7 reasons why Instrumentl is the easiest to use. And the reason why is because we are built specifically to bring grant prospecting, tracking, and management to one place. We are the institutional fundraising platform. We include active public and private funding sources for nonprofits. And we also have invite-only funders that might be good fits for you. And we have 990 reports and foundation reports that I've shared through different screenshots throughout the presentation, as well as a unique matching algorithm that helps show you good fit opportunities for your projects. Deadlines are automatically updated, which means if the foundation changes some sort of deadline, you will be notified, and you're able to take care of all of your task notes and documents in the same place, which makes it really easy for those local or regional opportunities that you have to apply for once in the fall and again in the spring. And what that leads us to is the key outcome, which is we save each team member 3 hours a week on average and increase their grant application output by 78% year over year. Just recently, in the last quarter, we also released our new Plus plan, which has advanced funder insights, which detail things like what is the breakdown of new grantees versus repeat grantees, recipient profiles, which allow you to dig into that question in terms of how do we find exactly who they have been funding or who has been funding this particular nonprofit in the past, and how do we identify invitation-only funders. And to celebrate our launch, along with this workshop, everyone here is going to be leaving with a personalized list of grant recommendations, as well as a 2-week free trial. So let's go ahead and set everybody up with good fit funders. We're going to create our projects together. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start running through some of the key strategies that we just went over. So in the Zoom chat, you're going to have a link, and I want you to go ahead and click that link. And what'll happen is you're going to be redirected to this page. And then once you're on this page, we're going to create our accounts together. And I'll make sure that everybody is following along so that nobody gets too far behind as we start to set up our projects and get our list of good fit funders. So I'm going to go ahead and also click along this link with you guys. And what I'm going to do is open up this page and start creating my accounts. And when you have gone ahead and hit the next button, go ahead and give me a thumbs up in the Zoom chat. That way I know where you're at in the process, and I can make sure that not too many people are getting too far ahead of us. So in this case, I'm creating my account here, and you will also be doing the same thing. And when you click that next button, what's going to happen is you're going to have this time to schedule a strategy consultation. What you're going to want to do here is just book something later in the week or early next week. That way, what you can do is you'll have dedicated time with our team to run through your project that you set up today, just to make sure that you set it up properly. And you can also ask any other follow-up questions around your grant strategy that you might want to review. So in this case, I'm just going to select something for later so I don't take one of your spots. And when you get to this page of helping you find new funders, give me a thumbs up in the Zoom chat. That way I know where you guys are at, and then we can start to set up our projects together as we start to search for things. Awesome. I just got my first thumbs up from Debbie. Very good. Kathy, looks good. I'm going to wait for a couple more and then we'll keep moving along and setting up our projects. Amanda just gave me a thumbs up. Awesome. Julie just gave me a thumbs up. Awesome. Oh, string just came in. Emily, Heather, awesome. Folks are following along. Perfect. I'm going to keep going. If you need some extra time, feel free to take it. I just want to make sure that we are able to really dig into some of these matches as we start going through. But the first thing you're going to be asked is, where is your organization located? So this is where you're going to select where your location is based out of. I'm going to continue my example where I'm in Los Angeles County and I'm working on that after-school tutoring program. So I'm selecting Los Angeles County. You're going to select wherever you're based out of. All right. From here in your project overview, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to name it something specific to a program that you're working on. So in my case, I have a after-school tutoring program, but I might want to just focus this search on the STEM component of this. So I'm going to do after-school tutoring for STEM, after-school tutoring STEM. And then you're going to select your applicant type. So once you've selected your applicant type, you're going to then answer the question of whether or not you'd like to seek grants for faith-based organizations or programs. I'm going to answer this for both sides, just so that you know both examples, since I know some folks might be part of faith-based organizations in the audience. If yes, you'll select yes. And from here, you're going to select your religious affiliation. I recommend that in this situation, you keep it active on both faith-based and secular programs. It'll maximize your results in terms of good fit funders. If no, you just select no and then click save and continue. In my case, I'm going to be no. So I'm just selecting no, and I'm now on step 3. When we get to step 3 on project details, what we want to focus on are the areas of impact. So this is where it might be the 2 to 4 community areas that you impact the most. And when you do this, my general tip for you is to be really, really specific. So it's always better to create a very specific search and then broaden it later than it is to start broadly and then go specific. The reason why is just because it really gives our matching algorithm the best chances of being able to find relevant local, regional, and national opportunities for you. So in this case, I'm going to search Los Angeles County, and maybe I also serve Alameda or something like that. I'm going to select those 2 counties. And then when I start moving on along, I'm going to move to the fields of work. And this is where we start to really dig into the must-dos that we talked about in the first portion of today's presentation. This is where I'm thinking about those keyword phrases at the first level thinking first, and then taking the second level thinking after that. So I'm going to search for things like tutoring or mentoring. I'm going to search for things like after school. I'm going to search for things like high school. I believe those are my 3 primary levels, but then I'm also going to look for things like educational access and equity. So educational access and equity, I might look for leadership development. I might look for STEM education. So I'm starting to fill these in. And what my goal is to identify 3 to 7 fields of work. All right. 3 to 7 is your goal. If you're struggling to come up with keywords, because, you know, it's early in the day for where you're coming in at or something like that, just click the browse all categories section. And what you can do is you can expand out the domain area that you are based out of to identify all the things that fall under that category. So in my case, I'm going to look at education, and then I might see that, you know, college success and persistence is another one of interest for me for high school students. Or what I also recommend folks to do is think about the adjacent domain that you're in. So even though I am an education-based program, I might also open up the community and human services section to see if there's anything of interest within this group too. In my case, though, I already have 7 fields of work, so I'm going to go ahead and save those. It will support up to 10. But I generally recommend 3 to 7 because that'll give you the best matches to what you need. At that point, the last questions we ask ourselves is, what size grants are we looking for? This is where you really start thinking about that question we talked about in the time savers of, is it worth our time? Well, in my case, I'm just going to use an example where I'm a small development team and I don't have time to work on opportunities that are less than $5,000. So I'm going to set that as my minimum. I'm going to leave the maximum open because, you know, who are we kidding? We want all the maximums we can get. And ultimately, what I'm going to look at here is the funding uses. So in this case, I'm going to select things around program and projects, general operating expenses, as well as some education outreach. But you're going to select whatever is applicable for you. And when you're ready for it, click that save and exit button and then give me another thumbs up in the Zoom chat so that I know that people are tracking with me, and we'll start to dig through some of these matches that come up. So when you start to see this screen of we found X number of grants for you, just give me a thumbs up again on the Zoom chat. That way I know I'm not going too far ahead. And in the case where you're struggling to think about particular keywords, tell me in the Zoom chat what you're working on and I'll help you brainstorm with you. And another nice thing is that in the case where you're setting up your project in a rush right now, that's time that you schedule with their team for a strategy consult, they'll be able to also brainstorm with you. And they set up hundreds of these projects every single week. And so that's something that will definitely be able to give you insights too. Amanda gave me a thumbs up. Sarah gave me a thumbs up. Emily did too. Angela, Heather, awesome. It looks like most people are tracking with me. Debbie gave me a thumbs up. Awesome. I'm going to give it a few more seconds or so for folks to follow along. Julie gave me a thumbs up. So at this point, what you're going to look at is you're going to click the Let's Go button. And when you get here, you're going to land on what we call the Matches tab. The Matches tab is essentially your personalized email inbox for all things grants. So imagine you had a personal assistant that was curating grants for you every single week, right? And so in this situation, I have found 374 active opportunities in the Opportunity Matches tab. So what this Opportunity Matches tab signals to me is it signals to me that there are 374 potential open opportunities that I can start applying for. And what I want to draw your attention to before you start jumping in is that this is being sorted by best match. However, I can actually change this as I get more familiar with Instrumentl as well, where I can sort it, for example, by deadline. And maybe I can crank out this January 19th deadline before tomorrow. And after a while, you're going to get more experience and you'll be able to sort things by different categories and things like that. But in my case, I'm just going to keep it on best match because that's what's going to show me what the algorithm thinks is the best match for me. The second thing I want to draw your attention to is the dropdown of the filter. When you start to look at this dropdown on the filter, you'll see that you can actually organize it based off the different funding uses that you set up your search for. So in this case, I can search, for example, for just the general operating opportunities out of the 374 matches. So in this case, here are just the 69 general operating opportunities. I can also search by funder type. So if you know, for example, that you're better at private opportunities than you are with corporate opportunities, you might select that dropdown for funder type. And then as you work your way down this list, you're going to see some key information about the opportunity. So in this case, on the right-hand side of your screen, what you can see is that the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation has an education, graduating high school, college, and career-ready grant opportunity. And the reason why I'm being shown this is because it matches my criteria. It matches my criteria of at least a minimum of $5,000 in funding. It matches my criteria for education high school in terms of my applicant type. It also matches it and my general operating expenses. And so what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about those 4 must-do strategies as well as those time saver strategies that we went over earlier, which is as we start to scroll through, what I'll see is that when possible, Instrumentl is going to summarize key pieces of information for me to evaluate whether or not they are a good fit funder. In this case, I can see the median grant amount is $15,000. And so what I'm asking myself is there alignment in terms of the funder's mission or focus area as I start to read through this? Well, in this case, I can see the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation is focusing on increasing high school graduation and college and career readiness outcomes for youth, especially in low-income areas. That certainly does sound pretty well similar in terms of alignment to my particular program. And as I start to scroll down further, I can start to look at how they make grants to national nonprofit groups that focus on best practices for developing after-school programs, as well as they focus on groups that are essentially working on scaling out different programs and initiatives for young people. And so this overall passes the gut check, which was must do number 3 of my strategies. And what I can also do is I can start to dig into the funder tab. So as I start to scroll through the funder tab, what I'm asking myself are the questions of, can I find a past history of giving? And are there past grantees in my area of focus? So in this case, I see the median grant amount is 15 grand. I can look through the key people section and see whether or not there is a potential person that I already have an existing relationship with. And lo and behold, maybe I already know Tiffany Lovett. And so reach out to Tiffany Lovett, and I can leave a note for myself in the bottom here. And as I start to scroll through this as well, what I can do is I can start to look at some of the key financial stats. So in this situation, what I can look at is, what does the 3-year trend look like for giving averages and medians? Well, I can see that it's actually been trending up. I also see that the median has actually been going down a little bit, so I should probably flag that for myself. And what I should also do is I should look at what the grant amounts are like. So in this case, I can see the relative distribution really does hit my sweet spot of being at least 5K or more. They do fund some below that, but there's a ton of grants beyond that in sizing. So I'm going to start to scroll through here. And again, in this case, for past grantees, I'm asking myself, is there a past history of grantees in my region? Well, in this case, California's got 252. I can sort by California, and I can start to read through this, and I can see that they are actually funding some after-school programs. They are supporting a statewide after-school network. So I already see alignment. And because I start to see that there are some past grantees that have received funding, I might want to reach out to the after-school all-stars to see what it's like to actually work with the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. As I keep scrolling down as well, I'm going to see other key pieces of information, like the openness to new grantees. In this case, something I need to flag for myself is that new grantees, percentage-wise, are not that much for the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. So it might actually help me to reach out to somebody that's already getting funded by them, because they might be able to facilitate an introduction to somebody important at the foundation. And lastly, we'll also see things like openness to new grantees. So you can see in terms of grant amounts that new grantees get less money than repeat grantees by almost a factor of 4-fold. And what this tells me is that if I am planning to work on the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, I should plan on year 1 being an intro year where I need to really prove myself in terms of my reporting requirements and making sure that I'm delivering on what I said I was going to do with their money. And from there, I can start to scale out and plan ahead in my grants calendar that in the following years, I can increase my ask. And then lastly, you'll see sections like giving by NTE code. And here I can see that education is a top area of giving. As I scroll down further, I can expand out what they are giving to. And this is where I can start to scroll through this and see what sort of cause areas they've been giving to. But overall, just from my raw gut check of all of these respective opportunities, I think this is a good opportunity for my after-school tutoring program. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and save this into my researching section. And so that is going to go ahead and save that into my tracker. Desiree asked me, how does that description get populated? Is it taken directly from the funder's website? In other words, is a submittable staff manually populating this data? I'm not part of submittable, so I can't answer that on submittable point. But essentially, in terms of our team, we have a full-time content team that is pulling this information from the funder's website. So those descriptions are getting reviewed and essentially added into Instrumentl. And then what I also wanted to flag was how I opened up that after school all-stars page. And what's cool about this is that if you find a similar organization to yours, you can view their recipient profile and then click the past awards received section. And here's another list of good fit funders that might be worth reaching out to. So in this situation, I've got all these different opportunities. Notice how we talked about how I set this project up for STEM. And you can see here, there is a funder that gave them money of 25 grand for a STEM program for COVID funding. So maybe I want to save this as an opportunity to pursue further, where, I'm going to just call it a grant. And what I can do is I can save it to my project and do more due diligence. And from here, I can just go ahead and save that as well as an opportunity. And so the theory is that from here, you're essentially working your way through this list of open opportunities and continuing to ask yourself these key questions that we talked about in our presentation, where the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the next opportunity and I'm going to follow the same process again. I'm asking myself questions like, is there clear fit and alignment in terms of past grantees? And is there a clear fit in terms of, the eligibility requirements? What does it look like in terms of the past giving trends of the funder? And this is why this is really important, is because if you were just looking at this in the old school approach, what you would do is you would scroll all the way down, open up one of these 990 reports, and you would be stuck scrolling through hundreds and hundreds of pages, where this 990 report's taking me ages to upload right now just because it's so long. And you would have to be looking through that manually by yourself for this information, as opposed to having it curated to you in one place, right? So I can't even open up this 990 report because it's too long right now, but I'm going to try to find one that maybe loads a little bit faster. Here's a faster one. So this is the old school way of doing this. You go through this and you essentially dig through the past grantee section, and this is where you would essentially look for alignment through this view. But the problem with that is, if you ever want to run any data analysis, like, what are all these numbers averaged out, or what the median is, you have to do that yourself. And so that's essentially what one of the biggest benefits are in terms of the researching process here. So let's say you go ahead and go through your opportunity matches section. What's next? Well, what's next is you can really start to take that last step, which was next level prospecting. And that's where you can start digging into your funder matches section. So in this section, we're going to show you funders that are either invite only, or they don't even have websites. So what you can do here is you can take a look at some people that are potentially good fits for you, as well as the giving rate by new grantees. So in this case, you can see for the Weingart Foundation, they have a big history in terms of matching a lot of the fields of work. And I can essentially do all the same similar due diligence, and I can see they accept applications, right? And I can see that they are focusing on education. And I can essentially from here just start to do more due diligence, answer these same key questions, and say, send initial outreach to them. From here, I can save this to my tracker and essentially start building that relationship over the next 6 to 12 months. So again, breakdown of what the difference between these two tabs are. Opportunity matches are active opportunities with funders that have websites that you can immediately start working on. Every single week, because you've set up this search, Instrumentl is going to keep looking out for you for the project you created. And you can create upwards of 10 projects or more on Instrumentl. So I could create another project that's my after-school tutoring program just for literacy, and another one that I currently have for STEM, and have 2 concurrent searches that are always running for me. Funder matches is the people that don't have websites or are invite only. And so this can help you identify another list of good fit funders on top of the people that you're actively working on. These are the funders that you're going to want to start to cultivate over a 6 to 12 month timeline when you have those pockets of time in your grants calendar. Once you start saving things, it will land in your tracker view. Your tracker view is essentially the digitized version of what you might be doing in an old school Excel sheet. But the reason why it's a lot more powerful is because you're able to essentially align things to your fiscal year, take care of different tasks, notes, and documents all in the same place. So if I go ahead and click into this, what I can see here is that I can write a note for myself or a teammate, as I've done here. But what I can also do is I can change the status as I move it along in my grant pipeline. And then I can also add tasks and upload documents. So in the case where I want to say review at meeting, what I can do is I can set a deadline for that for this Friday, set assignee and collaborator, and I'm going to get a notification when that is coming up. And similarly, I can add all my final documents to the same place. Why is that helpful? If you've ever had a grant writer leave your organization, you know why this is important. Because in the case where that same grant writer has been writing that proposal for the last 3 to 5 years, now you have a place where everybody can be held accountable to where all the key files are. That way, when you start working on it next year, it's all in the same place. If, for example, I started working on this next year, I could start to plan it for 2023, set it to my project. And when I do that, you can see that now I have the opportunity in my researching tab for 2022, but I also have already planned to do it in 2023. So this is where it really becomes powerful, because then what you can do is you can also change your fiscal year. You can add different tasks. You can even add your own grants that you already know of to this tracker. So if I wanted to add an individual one, I can click the add new and then add one button, or I can also upload many into the same place and then add that into this side of the site. So when you do that, it'll look something like this, in which I've got a really comprehensive account here. And I've essentially got this environmental project and I've got tons of opportunities that I'm working on in different views. And what I can do at any point in time is if my executive director is asking me, Will, how is it going in terms of your prospecting? Well, I can say, well, Mr. or Mrs. Executive Director, here's what I've researched. Here is what I'm working on for this year and next year. Create the report. And now I've got a PDF that I can attach that makes me look really good to my boss, because in this situation, I just created a custom report of exactly the ask that was being asked of me. So in the case where you're in the audience and you're a grant writing consultant or a consultant in general, Instrumentl is also really valuable for this component too in terms of reporting. And then the other thing that's helpful is just the quick find. In the case where you need help finding other opportunities, what you can do is navigate to the top left corner. And then in the quick find, you can search for different keyword phrases that are similar to what you're working on. So I might search the word tutoring. And from here, I start to look into the 990 reports of some past recipients of tutoring programs. And so from here, what I can do is I can start to scroll through these and I can start to see who has a past awards received section and start to, again, identify new good fit funders. So that's some of the high level. In the case where you want to invite a team member to your account, go to the bottom left and then click Account Manage Team. Here you'll be able to invite other team members to your account as well. I'm going to start digging into some learning takeaways, give you guys that freebie that I promised, answer some questions that are coming in through the chat, and then we'll start to wrap things up. So from here, in the case where you'd like a personal walkthrough and you didn't get a chance to book a strategy consult earlier, or book a walkthrough, you can do so in the chat below. But essentially, 3 learning takeaways from today. We've explored a lot in terms of strategies, but just to recap, we first dug into what are some of the must-dos when it comes to prospect research. We talked about things like making sure that you have alignment to the mission, making sure you run it through the gut check model, and make sure that you actually are able to honestly answer that for yourself. We dug into things like the time savers, which were some of those key questions to ask when it comes to funding. Questions like, do we have any connections to this funder? Does a funder's past giving and grantees align with our organization? In terms of looking at the percentage of openness to new grantees, does it meet our threshold? As well as things like, do we have the time and resources to actually work on this application? And then we actually dug into the next level side of things, which were some of the grant strategies beyond open opportunities. How can we look into those invite-only opportunities or the funders that don't even have websites? And so what you can do is you can apply all different versions of these strategies together and create your own unique grant strategy from some of these starting bases that you've learned today. In the case where you are looking to follow up with me, my email is will@instrumentl.com. If you want to save $50 off your first month, you can do so with the code NPLL50. You can also save 2 months off our annual plan with NPLL2MO annual. Like I mentioned earlier, we are giving everybody live a freebie today. So I have a workshop feedback form. If you guys just let me know what you thought of today's workshop, that will help me in continuing to improve this workshop, and you'll also get redirected to our freebie, which will include that 40-page resource in terms of go versus no-go grant evaluation RFP tool. Emily asked the question of, does Instrumentl provide any opportunities for sponsoring membership or waiving membership fees for organizations? All of our customers are nonprofits. And so the best codes are the codes that I shared with you in terms of some savings for you. Again, I'll share those also in the chat directly in case you want to save them for later. But yeah, what you can do is you can obviously talk to the team member that you booked a time with, and they're happy to explore other options that might work for you and your plan as well. If you have any other questions as well, feel free to type them into the chat. While we are waiting for those questions, though, I want to share you a few other tips and tricks that I personally like to use when I'm using Instrumentl. One of the things that you can do is when you are starting to work on your opportunities, you might have an existing tracker that you want to bring into Instrumentl. What you can do is click the Upload Many button here from the Add New button, and then you can download this template. And what will happen is our team will import your existing tracker for you. When you're on your free account, we're going to import the first 10 just so that you can get a sense of what it looks like. But once you become an Instrumentl customer, we import the entire thing for you. That way, what happens is every single week when you have a deadline or key thing coming up, that is going to be flagged for you. And what's really cool about this is once you start setting up all these different projects, When I go into something like the matches tab, you can see that Instrumentl tells me when I have new matches for me. So here I can see if I sort by new, these are the 2 new opportunities in my food security project since a few weeks ago when I logged in. Or if I go into this homeless shelter project, I can see I have 8 new opportunities for this search. And you'll notice how all of these projects are set up to different search criteria. Carrie asked, what is the monthly or annual fee? In order to answer that question, it depends on what pricing plan you're going to be on, but you can just click the view pricing button on the left-hand side here. Our plans start at $149 a month on the annual, $162 a month on the monthly, or $249 a month on the annual, $271 a month on the monthly. You can learn about all the different feature sets that we went through as well today. And so, yeah, that'll help you answer the questions in terms of what might be best fit for you. And what I like to tell folks as well is there's a ton of different ways you can get your ROI from Instrumentl. The first way is you think about what is another 12 hours of productivity mean for me on a monthly basis. So if you just take, ultimately what it costs your organization for you to pay you for 12 hours and the time that you're saving in Instrumentl there's your first ROI. Your second ROI is use that comparison tool of repeat grantees to new grantees and find a funder of yours that you have been under asking for the amount of money for. And from there, you can easily identify areas for you to fill in your grant pipeline. And the third thing is obviously find the new grant from Instrumentl, apply and win it. And that's where you get your ROI from Instrumentl in 3 different ways. Desiree asked, does Instrumentl help track awarded projects all the way through progress report and submission of other deliverables to the funder? Right now, I would say our support for that is somewhat minimal. The extent of that is going to be in the reporting task type. So what you're going to do is you're going to select add task, and then you're going to be able to select either reporting or a general task, and then you could create all the tasks that you're going to have here. If you're looking for things like grant disbursement and like expense reporting, things like that, we don't support that sort of use case, but we do find a lot of cases where our customers will create different things like, submit report, and they'll start tracking this sort of way. And what you can do is when you create a task, you can actually choose who it gets assigned to. And then essentially only that person will get pinged, or everybody on the team will get pinged and things like that. So that's the answer to that question. Let's see if there's any final questions. Otherwise, I will give you guys back some time to explore. And hopefully you got a lot of value out of today's workshop in terms of how to turbocharge your grants. If you are looking for additional grant workshops as well, we do run some free grant workshops. You can see our upcoming calendar as well there. I'll put that in the Zoom chat. We run weekly workshops actually at this point. So we have some different partner workshops coming up. For example, we're featuring Nonprofit Jenny podcast host Jenny Hargrove in a few weeks. We're also doing a few workshops in-house too that you'll see on our calendar there. Cool. Well, I'm going to keep it open for about a minute or so more, and then we'll see if anybody has any final questions. Otherwise, I will start to wrap things up. The ebook is in once you submit this feedback form, so I'm going to just show you, I'm going to click this link. When you submit this feedback form, it's going to be this one. You're going to get it in the submission form afterwards. I'm glad it was helpful for you, Amanda. Thanks so much for attending today. Awesome. Well, I think that wraps it up for me. So thank you so much, the Nonprofit Learning Lab, for hosting us once again. I believe also in the library, there's also the last workshop we ran. So in the case where you missed that first one, feel free to check that